Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, diverse experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode of Autism Stories, Mykie Mubarak joins us to discuss how being Arab impacts their autistic experience, competitive gaming, and tone tags. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Mykie, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories. I'd love to start off by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
My story begins when I accidentally stumbled upon a post about autism that listed some symptoms. I related to many of them, so I casually asked my best friend at the time if she thought I might be autistic. She dismissed the idea, saying her cousin was autistic and I wasn't like him. Since I didn't know much about autism and hadn't done any research, I brushed it off and moved on. It wasn't until years later, when I reconnected with an old friend, that things clicked for me. He's self-diagnosed because his dad is autistic and he shares a lot of similar traits with him. He told me that I had those same traits and encouraged me to look into it more. That's when I started my actual research, and it felt like I had unlocked something life-changing. I self-diagnosed first, but I was anxious about not being officially diagnosed. When I finally received a formal diagnosis, it was bittersweet. I felt relief and validation, but also a sense of grief for the years I spent without understanding myself. Finding the autistic community during that time gave me tools and support that I'd never had before. It truly changed everything.
I think we miss so much about autism if we aren't talking about intersectionality. Therefore, I'm wondering how being Arab impacts your autistic experience.
Being Arab and autistic has been incredibly challenging because there's so little education about autism in Arab culture. People often don't see autism as real or think it's something that just requires spiritual guidance. Others believe it's a phase, like wetting the bed, or they view the spectrum as a linear scale of mild to severe, which doesn't reflect the reality of how diverse autism really is. There are so many cultural expectations that clash with being autistic, especially as an AFAB queer person. It feels like playing life on extreme mode. For example, in Arab culture, greeting people at family gatherings often involves cheek kissing and giving compliments. I was seen as arrogant because I didn't initiate cheek kisses and instead let others kiss my cheek first. Social norms like being talkative, quick-witted, or engaging in mock humor are overwhelming for me. If you're sensitive or struggle with processing, you're singled out. On top of that, I was expected to act ladylike, which created even more pressure. I do try to educate people in my community when I can, but it's exhausting, and I have to pick my battles carefully since I only have so much energy every day. There have been moments when I've challenged stereotypes, and in those moments I've felt confident and empowered, but it's hard to describe that feeling in words. It's validating to stand up for myself and for others, but the emotional toll of constantly needing to advocate can be overwhelming. At the moment, I feel like being Arab makes things harder. While I'm proud of the achievements of Arab scientists and our rich history, I don't feel like I belong. Navigating the intersection of being Arab and autistic has been isolating, though I hope that sharing my experiences can help create change and understanding.
I read something that really resonated with me, where you wrote that you started unmasking after realizing how deeply masking had betrayed you, and that sometimes your body masks before you realize it. So what are some ways you've identified if your body is starting to mask?
Masking used to be second nature for me. I didn't even realize I was doing it because it felt automatic. After my diagnosis, though, something changed. It was like a switch flipped, and I physically couldn't mask anymore except for short bursts of 10 to 15 minutes. Even then, it takes so much energy that I can't sustain it. Not being able to mask has been freeing in some ways, but it's also dangerous. In public, or especially around authority figures, my natural autistic traits can be misunderstood. I've been yelled at by authority figures because of how I naturally present, and that's terrifying. I have to be extremely careful in these situations because masking isn't an option for me anymore. It's about finding ways to protect myself while still being true to who I am. When I can't mask, I have to focus on getting through situations as safely as possible. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do beyond complying and obeying to de-escalate the situation. I don't use scripts. I just keep my answers as short as possible, saying yes or not replying and nodding. Anything more risks making the problem worse, especially when dealing with authority figures. It's not ideal, but it's the best way I've found to protect myself in those moments.
I learned about you on Instagram, and something that I think is important that you included in your profile on Instagram is discussing how you ask people to use tone tags for you as those are things that you need. Can you explain about tone tags for our listeners that might not be familiar, and how do they specifically affect your communication with others?
Tone tags have made me think more about accessibility and communication overall, especially in areas like gaming, work, and social media. I use tone tags every time I text someone new who's going to be part of my life for a long time. Unfortunately, most people don't respect that request, and I've learned not to pressure them. But I do set boundaries by reminding them, you knew I was autistic. I asked for tone tag tags. And I even sent you information about how to use them. You didn't follow through, and now I've misunderstood something. It can be frustrating, but tone tags have taught me the importance of advocating for my needs, while also accepting that not everyone will understand or accommodate them. When people do respect that request, though, it makes communication so much easier and less anxiety-inducing for me.
One of your recent posts on Instagram discussed your love of gaming, but at the same time, the misogyny, sexual harassment, and discrimination against women, those that have BIPOC identities, queer and disabled communities, you and so many others have experienced through gaming. However, you did point out that with all of these challenges in competitive multiplayer gaming can be deeply rewarding, especially when you have a supportive team. So how have there been ways that you've been able to find supportive teammates?
Finding supportive teammates happened for me by accident. One day I decided to speak in voice chat during a game, and this guy responded in such a respectful and kind way. He gave me space, didn't say anything hurtful, and just treated me like a person. We kept playing together and eventually became gaming buddies. He introduced me to one of his friends, and the three of us now play together regularly. Having supportive teammates makes such a huge difference. I can have fun, be myself, and feel celebrated instead of othered or unwelcome. It's a rare thing in competitive gaming, but when you find it, it makes all the challenges worth it.
You also stated that solo games are where you find your true comfort in gaming, as these become safe spaces for you. What are some of these games that truly bring safety into your life?
I absolutely love Bully. It's ironic considering the premise, but it was the first solo game I ever played, and it gave me an outlet to express myself. I still revisit it from time to time. Another favorite is The Last of Us. Everything about it, the characters, the world building, the sound design, the story, and especially the voice acting is just incredible. The voice performances bring so much depth and emotion to the characters, making the world feel alive and immersive. Both of these games have brought me comfort because I relate to the characters, but they also allow me to explore and react however I want without feeling judged. Solo games are comforting because I can dive into their worlds fully at my own pace. There's no pressure to perform or meet someone else's expectations. It's just me, exploring and playing how I want. They help me recharge by giving me a safe space to immerse myself in something outside of my reality, which can be such a relief when I'm stressed. Gaming has also inspired me to think about creative outlets like game design. I've always loved games so much that I wanted to become a game designer, but the grind culture in that field and how it often favors holistic and neurotypical people feels discouraging. My learning disabilities also make it harder to break into a field like that. Despite these challenges, gaming has shaped how I see storytelling, creativity, and the importance of crafting accessible and immersive experiences for everyone. It's something I still dream about, even if it feels out of reach sometimes.
And lastly, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
I'm most active on Instagram, where I share content about autism, neurodivergence, and mental health. I also talk a lot about my experiences living with CPTSD and how that intersects with being autistic. Sharing my story through posts is therapeutic for me, but it's also a way to connect with others and advocate for neurodivergent people to be respected and understood. I plan to start a YouTube channel in the future, but for now, Instagram is my main platform. The community I've built there is so wonderful and supportive. It feels like I've finally found my tribe, and I'm incredibly grateful for the connections I've made. I hope my story reminds people that neurodivergence is diverse, valid, and worthy of understanding. If nothing else, I want others to know they're not alone. There's so much power in connecting with people who truly understand you and creating a space where we can all feel seen and respected.
Thanks so much to Mykie for the conversation. To learn more about Mykie, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on how do you navigate being autistic in your culture? Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self-directed, purpose-driven lives through our customized life coaching and community groups. So please join us today to experience judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.